Hello and welcome to the video lecture on transforming unary relationships into relations. So again, this is the weird one. This is where we've got an entity that has a relationship to itself, and typically this is a one-to-many recursive foreign key to the same relation. You should have, again, in previous courses, had some exposure to what we talk about when we talk about recursion. This is not really the same thing. It's close, and that's why they use the recursive word. So again, it's many to many. Typically, there are two relations involved. In this case, it's just one. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Here is the ERD, right? So here's our employee being related to employee, realizing that we have employees listed in the employee table that are employees, and then some of those employees that are listed are also managers of other employees. And for efficiency's sake, and we're gonna start talking about efficiency more and more, especially when we get into Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is where we really start talking about efficiency and performance as far as database design. So in this case, we've got what we want to do is, instead of having an employee relation and a manager relation, since we're keeping track of exactly the same data on both of them, there's no reason to make like a super type subtype. There's no reason to have two relations. We simply want this relation to have a relationship to itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a foreign key that's called manager ID. So in this case, we've got the employee relation looks like employee ID, which is the primary key, the employee name, the employee date of birth, and then we have a manager ID. So that value is a foreign key to itself, right? So an employee ID is going to show up in the manager ID if that employee instance has a manager. So who's the boss of bosses? The boss of bosses would be someone in the employee table that doesn't have a manager ID. So if that person doesn't have a manager ID, that person doesn't have a boss, that means they're probably the CEO, and they only answer to the shareholders. And I hope that's clear. Everyone else at this table should have a manager that they report to, right? The CIO is still going to report to the CEO, right? So one last slide. So now we've got a unary many-to-many relationship, and the relationship, so an item can be related to many items, right? So again, this is a scenario, since it's many-to-many, we have to create an associative entity. It's the same as anything else. So here we're going to have, and this might be confusing to some people, so we've got everything's an item as far as this company is concerned, right? So when we're creating the ERD for this, the ERD has an item, and everything's an item. So there are some items that have components. So, when you think of a basic item, at the lowest level, think of like a screw or a nut or a washer, right? Now, then we could also talk about another item that might be a stapler, right? Or a motor of some kind, or a wrench, right? Something that actually has component parts that are used to create it. So what this company is doing is this company is saying that I'm going to list all of my items, whether they're base components or whether they're machined, put together items that we sell. For instance, a wrench still has a couple of moving parts to it that have to be put together. A wrench Probably not. That's a bad example. But scissors, a stapler, things of that nature have subcomponents that are put together to make that. Okay, so hopefully you understand where that's coming from. So if that's so when we talk about that, what we're going to do is, in order to keep track of the components that create something like a stapler, we're going to make a table or an entity called component. And that component is going to be the item number and all of its component parts and what quantity that is. A stapler might have 3 or 4 different little screws that are used to put it together. All right, so hopefully that clears or makes clear a many-to-many unary relationship. And that is the end of this video lecture.